Jasmine Crockett thought she had Elon cornered until he calmly said one sentence that stopped the entire hearing cold. There wasn't a seat left in the Rayburn House office building. Every corner of the chamber was filled, press badges dangling in turns, whispering updates, phones silently recording. The hearing hadn't even started yet, but the air was heavy with expectation. Outside, cable news vans lined the block, their anchors already live with teasers. Elon Musk set to testify today in front of the House Oversight Committee. One was saying the world's richest man under oath, defending free speech and corporate power on one of the most controversial platforms on the internet. X inside, Elon Musk sat alone at the witness table, no entourage, no legal team flanking him, just him, a glass of water and a stack of notes. He barely glanced at his black jacket, was simple, no flashy brand logo, no performance. He looked calm, focused, waiting. Representative Jasmine Crockett hadn't arrived yet, but her name had already been whispered around the room. Like a spark waiting for dry grass, she had a reputation, sharp, unapologetic, confrontational, and when it was announced she'd be leading one of the questioning segments, everyone knew things might get messy. C-SPAN had cut to commercial. Twitter, while X was exploding with hashtags, had Musk under oath, hashtag Crockett vs Musk, hashtag free speech test. 10 minutes later, the chairman banged the gavel. This hearing will now come to order. Elon shifted slightly in his chair but kept his eyes forward, his face unreadable. The chairman ran through formalities, thanking Musk for his appearance and reminding everyone that this was a discussion about government accountability and tech responsibility. That's when the door opened and Representative Crockett stepped in, hair done, power red blazer, expression locked in. She didn't look at Musk, she didn't need to, she knew the cameras were on. As she sat down, a junior staffer handed her a printed packet. She gave it a glance, but her eyes were already fixed on the man across the room. Musk watched her too. Curious, not intimidated. As the opening statements dragged on, the tension started to grow. The chairman spoke about disinformation, government contracts, and the role of private tech in public life, but everyone in the room knew where this was headed. This wasn't just about algorithms or data transparency. This was about control of the narrative, control of speech, control of the digital town square, and Elon Musk had taken that control and flipped the table. The government wasn't used to someone playing by different rules. Especially not someone who didn't flinch in the face of public scorn. Since his acquisition of Twitter, Musk had become a symbol, depending on who you asked. To some, a savior of free speech, to others a reckless billionaire throwing gasoline on public discourse. But one thing was undeniable: he wasn't backing down. The chairman finished his preamble. Mr. Musk, you'll have 5 minutes to make your opening remarks. Elon cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. I'm here because I believe in the value of open dialogue. Even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. If free speech only protects agreeable speech, then it's not really free. My goal with X is to create a platform where people can think out loud without fear of being erased. No dramatic pause, no soaring rhetoric, just plain words, clear and direct. And just like that it began. But Representative Crockett wasn't going to let him talk uninterrupted for long. Mr. Musk, Representative Jasmine Crockett said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. You claim to care about open dialogue. That's interesting, because the platform you run has become a breeding ground for hate, lies, and political manipulation. No warm-up, no preamble. She came in swinging. Musk turned his head toward her, measured. Congresswoman, with all respect, that's a serious accusation, and I'd argue it's exactly the kind of comment that proves why open platforms are necessary. People need to see what others really believe, whether we like it or not. Crocodile didn't blink. Oh, I've seen it, and you know what I see. I see white supremacists with check marks, conspiracy theorists boosted to the top of timelines, people threatening violence who are allowed to stay online because according to you it's just free speech. Is that the vision? Is that your idea of progress? He looked down for a beat, then back up. Progress is messy, so is freedom, but censorship, that's neat and clean, right? Just hit delete on anything you don't agree with. Crockett leaned forward. You're twisting this. No one's asking you to delete people for having opinions. We're asking why you're actively promoting voices that endanger lives. Hate speech is not the same thing as free speech, or do you not see the difference? There were murmurs in the room. A few heads turned. The hearing was being streamed in real time and already clips were being snipped and circulated. Musk didn't raise his voice. He didn't match her intensity. He stayed grounded. The problem is who gets to define hate speech. You, Congress, the same government that's funded secret programs to influence what people see online, because if that's who decides, then we're no longer protecting democracy, we're curating it. The moment hung in the air. Crockett's tone sharpened. So you're a victim now. The billionaire CEO of one of the most influential platforms in history is just a poor guy trying to speak truth to power. He almost smiled, but didn't. I'm not claiming to be a victim, Congresswoman. I'm pointing out a principle. When institutions, any institutions, try to silence dissent under the pretense of safety, that's a slippery slope. It doesn't end with the extremists, it ends with anyone who's inconvenient. She scoffed, flipping a page in her packet. That's rich coming from someone who once banned a teenager for tracking your private jet. I didn't ban him, I temporarily suspended a doxing account that shared real-time location data. That's a safety issue, not a speech issue. Let's not confuse the two. Crocodile shot back. You decide what safety, you decide what speech. You're playing God on a digital stage, and we're all supposed to clap while you do it. Musk tilted his head slightly as if genuinely thinking about her words. I make calls, yes, but they're not based on politics, they're based on principle, the same principles this country was founded on. Even if we sometimes forget that. The room grew heavier. You could feel the back and forth tightening like a rope in a tug of war. No one was quite sure which side the public would side with, but the stakes felt bigger than two personalities. One was fire, the other ice, but somehow the ice wasn't melting. Crockett's voice rose. You are unleashing something you don't understand, Mr. Musk. People are being radicalized on your platform. They're believing lies, spreading them, acting on them. That's not freedom, it's chaos. And then Musk replied, I steady tone firm, Congresswoman, what you call chaos I call reality, and trying to suppress reality only makes people distrust the system more. People aren't stupid, they know when something's being hidden. But Crockett wasn't finished, and what came next would light the match neither of them could put out. Representative Crockett pressed both hands on the desk, leaning forward like a prosecutor closing in on a confession. The camera zoomed in slightly. No one needed prompting to know this was about to escalate. I'm going to ask you a yes or no question, Mr. Musk, she said, eyes fixed on him. Has your platform increased the spread of misinformation since you took over? Elon didn't flinch. That's not a yes or no question. It's based on how you define misinformation. The government has been caught labeling inconvenient truths as misinformation. So whose truth are we talking about? She frowned. I'll take that as a yes. He shook his head lightly. You can take it however you want, but redefining the answer doesn't make it true. Someone in the back of the room snorted and a few journalists scribbled harder in their notepads. Crockett wasn't smiling. You've created a platform where people feel entitled to say the most disgusting, vile things, and they feel protected doing it because you've made it clear there's no referee, no boundaries, just chaos. Musk tilted his head. And yet people still come. Millions of them, because it's the last place where people can still speak without being filtered through layers of government-approved talking points. She narrowed her eyes. Do you know how reckless that sounds? No, he said calmly. It sounds honest. There was a pause, brief but long enough for the tension to multiply. The chairman shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. The exchange had taken on a life of its own. Crockett took a breath, but it came out more like a sigh of frustration. You're making yourself into a martyr, Mr. Musk, but the truth is you are just another rich man who bought a megaphone and now wants to call it a revolution. Musk leaned forward slightly, meeting her gaze. Congresswoman, I didn't buy a megaphone. I bought a battlefield where both sides get to speak for a second, just 1 second. Crockett's mouth twitched like she was caught between disbelief and fury. She came back in fast. You allow accounts that push conspiracy theories about elections, about vaccines, about school shootings, real tragedies that have devastated families. You let people turn those tragedies into content. I also allow people to question institutions, Musk replied, because when they silence questions, trust breaks. Not everyone speaking is right, but everyone's silence might have been. You sound like a man who's never lost someone because of lies, she said coldly. He paused. I've lost a lot, but I've never lost the ability to think for myself, and I won't take that from anyone else either. There was a visible reaction in the room. Some members leaned back, a few exchanged glances. Others stayed stone-faced. Crockett flipped to the next page in her notes, voice rising again. You say this is about principles, but let's be honest, you love the attention. The chaos benefits you, the headlines, the controversy, it's good for your brand. Musk didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then said, if I wanted applause, I wouldn't be sitting here. Silence. No retort this time. Crockett froze just for a beat before adjusting her mic. The chairman leaned in to speak, but paused, sensing the room wasn't ready to move on yet. Musk leaned back slightly in his chair, hands still folded. I don't enjoy conflict, Congresswoman. I'd rather build than fight, but if speaking plainly means being dragged into hearings like this, so be it. I'll still show up. But Crockett wasn't finished, and the next thing out of her mouth would flip the temperature in the room from tense to boiling. Representative Crockett gripped her microphone like it might escape her, the edges of her voice sharpened. So let me get this straight. You're just a humble guy sitting in the chair of power, telling everyone else how to interpret reality. Elon raised an eyebrow. No, I'm someone who built a platform and said speak your mind. That's very different. She shook her head, almost laughing. You're playing semantics, Mr. Musk. You claim neutrality while your algorithms amplify the worst voices because outrage pays, doesn't it? I don't run the algorithms for outrage, he replied. I adjusted them to reduce manipulation, and as for the worst voices, the worst ones are the ones people try hardest to silence. Her tone turned mocking. That's poetic. Do you write these lines before bed, or do they just come to you while dodging accountability for the first time? Moose didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, then turned slightly, speaking into the mic with more weight than volume. Congresswoman, I don't think it's hateful to let people speak. It's dangerous when one side decides what's acceptable to say. That's how freedom dies, not in a bang but in silence. That line, not in a bang but in silence, cut through the hearing like a snap string. The room went still. Even Crockett blinked behind her. A few members of the committee shifted in their seats. One assistant lowered his pen. Another looked up from her laptop, pausing mid-typing. It was subtle, but everyone felt the gravity shift. Crockett, caught in that brief moment of stillness, tried to reclaim the air. Don't quote me drama, Mr. Musk, she snapped. This isn't a movie script. This is real life. People are dying from lies online, and you're sitting here quoting lines like a philosopher king. He didn't flinch. It's real life, and that's exactly why it matters. When people are afraid to speak, even wrongly, they don't stop thinking, they just stop trusting. She slapped her hand against her stack of notes. You know who doesn't get to hide behind intellectual gymnastics? The families of shooting victims who see their kids turned into hashtags for clout. The nurses harassed because someone read one too many posts from your favorite free thinkers. You're giving cowards a megaphone. Elon replied, voice steady, no, I'm giving everyone a mirror. What they do with it, that's on them. The chairman raised his gavel to cut in, but Crockett was already leaning forward again. You're hiding behind freedom because it's convenient, she said, but the truth is you don't care who gets hurt as long as you don't have to answer for it. You want to be the genius rebel who breaks the rules but never takes the fall. A beat past then Musk leaned into the mic, voice low, with respect, it seems like your issue isn't with misinformation, it's with not being able to control the message anymore. That landed hard. The temperature in the room flipped instantly. Some gasped softly, others sat back wide-eyed. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. Crockett stared at him, eyes burning. Excuse me, he didn't repeat it. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. Crockett's voice rose an octave. So now I'm the enemy of free speech because I'm trying to stop people from spreading lies that get people killed. Is that it? I didn't say you were the enemy, Musk replied. I said you want control, and maybe, just maybe, people are tired of being told what's safe to think. That was the point where decorum cracked. Crockett began speaking over him, voice raised, mic shaking. You're twisting everything I say. You're trying to sound clever while avoiding accountability. The chairman's gavel banged. Order, order, Representative Crockett. But she kept going. This man is gaslighting us all in real time and pretending it's noble. More banging. Congresswoman, this is a formal hearing. Musk stayed quiet. Nah, he simply looked ahead, the chaos playing out around him. His face didn't change, his breathing didn't shift. He didn't have to say anything else. The clip was already making its way around every social platform, and the public, they were watching every second. But outside the chamber something even louder was building, and Musk was about to feel it in full. By the time Elon Musk stepped outside the hearing room, the world had already made up its mind several times over. The marble floors of the Capitol echoed under his steps as aides trailed behind, peppering him with questions. And reporters tried to squeeze him one last angle. He didn't stop, didn't rush either, just walked like someone who knew this wasn't over but wasn't afraid of what came next. Back inside the chamber, Representative Crockett was still seated, jaw tight, papers spread in front of her like they might explain why she didn't feel like she'd won. Outside, the sidewalk buzzed with energy. A group of college students from Baltimore State had gathered behind barricades, phones out, waiting for a glimpse. Two held up hand-drawn signs. Free speech isn't optional and platforms aren't publishers. A reporter from Des Moines shoved the mic forward. Mr. Musk, do you regret anything you said in there today? He paused just long enough to look the reporter in the eye. No, he said, if I regret anything, it's that we're having this conversation so late. By noon, the confrontation had become the headline across all networks, not just the usual cable suspects, local stations and Flagstaff Mobile, Toledo, all replaying the moment Musk dropped the line about control and silence. Clips exploded on X. One posted by a podcaster in Tulsa was captioned, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. It had 3.2 million views before the hour was over. On the other end of the screen, the reaction was split. Some said Jasmine Crockett exposed Musk for what he was, a billionaire unchecked. Others said she proved Musk's point entirely, that shouting louder doesn't make someone right. But what made the clip last was Musk's stillness, his refusal to take the bait. He hadn't tried to one-up her. He hadn't mocked her, he let her do the yelling, and he stayed planted. It unsettled people in different ways. A segment on public radio out of Santa Fe brought on two media professors. One praised Crockett for holding power accountable. The other said, if your opponent looks like a monk and you look like you're on fire, it doesn't matter how valid your points are, you've already lost the room. Meanwhile, back at the Tesla campus in Fremont, employees gathered in the break room not because they were forced to, not because it was mandatory, but because they were curious. A few chuckled at the memes flying across Slack channels. Others just watched in silence, nodding along when Musk defended the mirror effect of social media. He doesn't speak like a politician, one said. He doesn't speak like a COO either, another replied. By evening, late-night hosts were already cutting their monologues to include the hearing in Phoenix. A Vietnam veteran named Paul Ramirez watched the whole replay from his recliner, arms crossed. He didn't care much for tech guys. But as the hearing wore on, he found himself leaning forward. That guy doesn't blink, he said to no one in particular across the country. People who didn't usually pay attention to congressional hearings were watching this one because it didn't feel like policy jargon. It felt like something else, like two worlds colliding. In a podcast recorded in Kansas City later that night, the host said this wasn't a debate about tech, it was a fight over control. Who has it, who wants it, and who's not afraid to let it go. Crockett had gone home by then. Her staff was fielding interviews, trying to manage the blowback and the praise. It was all mixed. Some praised her fire, others said she let emotion overtake the point. A local paper in Arlington wrote, reptilian Crockett came to win. Musk came to remind us it wasn't a game. But while the headlines were loud, Musk's next conversation away from cameras would show what mattered most. Later that evening, tucked away in a quiet side office on the third floor of the Capitol, Elon Musk sat across from Representative Colin Mercer. of Oregon, a longtime moderate known more for his listening than his talking. No cameras, no microphones, just two chairs, a desk, and the last flickers of daylight fading through the blinds. Mercer poured 2 fingers of iced tea into a glass and slid it across the desk that got heated. He said simply. Musk offered a faint smile, still composed. It usually does when the conversation's real. Mercer leaned back, studying him for a moment. You didn't blink when she came at you. I don't take it personal, Musk replied. I know what this is. She's fighting for what she believes in, and so am I. Mercer nodded slowly. You don't think some of the stuff people say on your platform is dangerous? Oh, it's absolutely dangerous, Musk said, but so is silence, so is deciding who gets to speak based on whose feelings. We want to protect. The moment we start filtering reality to make people comfortable, we lose the truth entirely. He took a sip of the tea. Mercer didn't say anything for a while. Then you think the government's scared of the truth? I think some people are scared of losing control, and the truth has a funny way of stripping power from people who depend on illusion. There was a silence that felt earned. Elon stood, walked over to the window and looked out at the city below. The lights were coming on. Washington wasn't sleeping anytime soon. You know, he said, I didn't buy X to make friends. I didn't even buy it to make money. I bought it because the world needs places where people can argue, mess up, grow, not curated playgrounds, real places with real risk. Mercer let out a breath. You realize how rare it is to hear someone say that in this building. Musk glanced back. That's part of the problem. Outside, a security officer passed by the window. Sirens somewhere in the distance. Musk turned back toward the desk. This wasn't about me and Crockett, he said. This was about whether we still believe people can handle the truth, or if we've decided they need it spoon-fed, filtered, pre-approved. Mercer leaned forward. You think people can handle it? Not always, Musk said, but that's not the point. We don't get to gatekeep reality because it's inconvenient. That's the fast track to total control. Mercer nodded again, thoughtful, quiet as Musk reached for his coat. Mercer added, one last thing, you know she's going to be trending for days, right? That line you dropped, it's already on t-shirts. Musk shrugged. People remember simple truths. They don't need to be shouted. He paused at the door. The louder people get about protecting others from speech, the more I wonder, who are they really trying to protect, and from what? And with that he left the room. Down the hall a cleaning crew was emptying trash bins. One of them looked up startled for a moment, then nodded slightly when she realized who he was. Musk nodded back, not out of pride, just habit, and kept walking. No words, no press, waiting, just a man walking away from chaos like he had somewhere better to be. And maybe he did, because the thing is, truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits for the noise to die down, and when it does, it's still there. If there's anything to take from all of this, it's this: stay calm in the noise, speak clearly even when it's hard, and never trade silence for comfort, not when the truth is on the line. Like what you heard. Subscribe for more bold stories that cut through the noise.